Hello everyone, I'm Elisha and I'll be sharing my experiences and thought process making art as an artist with a strong red-green color blindness. But I'd like to formally introduce myself first. So hi, my name is Elisha Ramos. I'm a freelance pixel artist from the Philippines. I'm mostly a generalist, so I change art styles depending on the project I'm working on. I also make small games every now and then, mostly by participating on game jams. The latest of which is a horror game set in a public bathroom stall that can be finished in under 2 minutes. So I switch mediums from time to time. Sometimes I'd be doing low poly 3D, sometimes digital painting, but pixel art is irrevocably the medium I've known to love the most. I mentioned that I'm not fixed upon a single pixel art style and can adapt to different ones no problem. But what I always struggle with is, you guessed it, it's the reason why we're here. Colors. So I'm not here to talk extensively about what color blindness is. I'm sure people already have an understanding about it. But first, let me point out that majority of colorblind, including myself, don't see in grayscale. But there are colorblind people that do. It's called achromatopsia, which is an extremely rare type. I, however, can be classified as having deuteranopia, a strong red-green color blindness. Speaking of green, the way my mom discovered that I was colorblind was pretty funny, if you don't mind a bit of an origin story if you would. So I showed my interest in arts at a young age. I used to draw all the time when I was a kid, I was told. So one day I was drawing and coloring, and I was apparently drawing a person. When I finally showed my mom the drawing, she said that I did a great job drawing the Incredible Hulk. But the thing was, I wasn't drawing the Incredible Hulk at all. My mom remembered me saying that I was just drawing a normal person, probably doing some early figure drawing practice. So apparently I wanted to give the guy in my drawing the same tanned or brown skin color we Filipinos have, but I grabbed the green crayon instead of the brown one. And right then and there, she knew I was colorblind. I only have the faintest memory of this particular moment, but I enjoyed telling it because I always find it worthy of a chuckle. So, yeah, as a kid, if you stripped away the labels of my crayons, I wouldn't be able to tell which color is which. Well, that would still be true today. As a matter of fact, when I was still figuring out pixel art, most of the tools I encountered had no labels on their colors in the color palettes. The modern MS Paint has it, but seriously, who uses that anyway? Now, there might have been softwares out there that did, but most of the ones I found weren't specifically built for pixel art. But what they all have, though, are numbers, and most of them come labeled in 3 letters RGB. The reason why not a lot of art tools stuck with me at the time was very simple. It was because of these guys. As much as all of them have their own pros and cons, all these color palettes, color wheels, or whatever, in my eyes, they kinda turn into this. For those who don't know, these clusters of circles are used for the Ishihara test, the most common method of testing someone's color perception. If you've run into this little test, you know how it goes. They show you a plate, you tell them what number you see. And just to give you a quick insight on how I, or most colorblinds, experience this, here's usually what happens. Someone hands out a set of plates and asks, "What number do we see?" "Oh, that one's easy. That's 12. "Oh, this one's pretty easy as well. It's clearly a 3. "Oh, I see nothing." Don't even get me started on this one. You get the idea. So, circling back to my point. How is looking at the RGB values easier than looking at the color itself? Well, it's easier for me because instead of looking at these Ishihara plates, I look at these numbers instead. The numbers in the RGB slider turn something we perceive differently to something that which values stay the same regardless of software, color calibration, or screen display. The RGB model is an additive color model, meaning you get other colors by adding certain values of the three main colors: red, green, and blue. These values are represented in different ways, but I'm more used to reading them as a range from 0 to 255, 0 being no shade of that particular color at all, and 255 being a full intensity of that color. It's kind of like the color lessons you got in kindergarten art class. Mixing red and yellow gives you orange, mixing blue and yellow gives you green, and so on. I used to not eyeball colors, so to get a color, I instead manually enter values in the RGB field. In doing so, I figured out rules or shortcuts that help me pick a color faster and know where I am in the color wheel, spectrum, whatever you want to call it. Rule number 1. Yellow is equal parts red and green. This was the first one I had to get used to because it sounded a bit counterintuitive for me. In traditional mediums, you get yellow as a primary color, so you don't need to mix colors to get it. In an additive color model though, an equal parts of red and green is guaranteed to land you somewhere in the yellow range. It still kind of confuses me even today why that is, but I've accepted the fact that that's just how it works. Rule number 2. The closer the RGB values are to 0, the darker the color is, and the closer they are to 255, the brighter they get. Now this one's pretty easy to figure out, and I often did this to get a different shade of a color by just sliding all three sliders either to the left or right by an equal amount. This gives you a darker or brighter shade with the same exact color. Very simple but very helpful. Lastly, rule number 3. The closer all the RGB values are to each other, the less saturated the color is. So, if a color has all equal values like all 50, all 150, or all 200, that color is guaranteed to be a shade of gray. So the saturation of a color is directly proportional to the difference between all three values. So yeah, I think those are the most important things to remember. Using this knowledge, here's an example scenario detailing how I'd pick a color. Say if I were to sprite our favorite red practice fruit. You know what I'm talking about? The cherry. First, I need red, of course. I drag the sliders to 255, 0, 0 to get red. But I don't want it to be overly saturated. So thinking about rule number 3, I'd slide down the red slider a bit and increase both green and blue a bit as well. Maybe add a small amount of blue to get a colder tone. So after all that, I might end up with something like 175, 35, 50. Take note that I don't accurately perceive how different the value is to plain red. I see that it's different enough, but I have a better idea thanks to the numbers. I'd know that it's less burning than red and that it'll be a bit on the color side. For the leaf, I'd reset everything to green. Slide green down considerably more, slide blue up by a significant amount, and red gets dragged up a bit to balance the tone out. Let's say I end up with 95, 25, 65. Getting brown for this time is easy. Brown is just a dark, slightly desaturated orange. By the way, getting orange was pretty tricky to me at first, but I figured out how it worked eventually. Orange is just 2 parts red and 1 part green. So, get orange, just slide those down a bit more, and I end up with something like 110, 60, 30. Now that the base colors are there, getting the shades of these colors is pretty straightforward, and I'll be mostly using rule number 2. I just drag all 3 sliders down. The amount depends on how much contrast I want and how dark the base color already is. Oftentimes I'd play around and keep the blue slide higher than the rest because I like cold shadows personally. For the specular highlight, I just reset to white and go from there, usually sliding red and green down a bit and the blue by a fair amount, keeping the values close like in rule number 3 but having that orange or yellow tint. I then shade a sprite using the colors that I got. If I see a particular shade I don't like, I just end up adjusting the color mostly by altering the numbers by some increment, usually 10, because I find that value the smallest change I can perceive. Another point I think that's worth sharing is how I do anti-aliasing. I like incorporating anti-aliasing in my pixel art. It's great in smoothing out edges and stray lines, and it adds a bit of polished feel to key areas in the artwork. Anti-aliasing usually requires you to get a color in between of 2 different colors, usually a high contrasting pair, which is used to bridge or close the difference between these 2 colors, giving the impression of a smoother transition. So creating a new in-between color is pretty easy using the RGB values. I mean, it's literally just getting a value that's in between 2 numbers. But I'm a big proponent of reusing colors. I've made it a personal restriction for myself to not add new colors if I don't have to. Now, this personal rule might have just stemmed from the fact that I'm more prone to overhauling colors later down the line. So, for me, more colors equals more problems, basically. But generally speaking, though, I think it's a great practice to impose a limitation for yourself every once in a while. For example, you can greatly limit the canvas size, only use a 2-color palette, etc. Whatever shakes you off your comfort zone and puts your creativity to the test. This helps, personally at least, to figure out solutions to problems in a clever or unconventional manner that I would have otherwise not discovered. So going back to anti-aliasing, like I said, I just simply reuse colors. Now this part I think might be of interest to some because even though I have these 3 rules I mentioned before, that I follow by looking at the numbers, for this step I just flat out utilize my color blindness instead. So what do I mean? I guess I can summarize it best by saying this. If the colors are close enough in my eyes, it's basically the same color. Again, I only do this for the anti-aliasing stage. Instead of creating a new in-between color by using the sliders, I instead cycle through all the colors I already have, and if that color is close enough to the in-between color that I need, that I basically can't tell the difference right away, I will almost certainly use that color. Obviously, I still struggle with colors a lot, no matter how much knowledge on color theory or coloring tips from other artists I acquire. There are just some things that don't make sense to my eyes. I sometimes just simply follow the usual color schemes like complementary, analogous, etc., but most of the time I just do whatever works for my colorblind eyes. And this usually results to a back and forth with some of my freelance clients. They'd want a particular color to pop out more, but I think that that color is already saturated or bright enough based on the RGB values, so I'd adjust it by a really small amount and send it back. They'd see it and tell me the new color still isn't strong enough, so they send it back again. I adjust by a small amount, rinse and repeat. This does not happen every time, and it feels extremely assuring when it doesn't, but I'd imagine it happens way more often to colorblind artists than those who are not. And that's about all I have to share regarding my workflow as a colorblind person, or at least during when I was first learning the ropes of pixel art. Today I've learned how to use the color ramps. Hooray for me! And it made me slightly faster during the color selection stages, but I still perceive the harmonies based on my old techniques. The color ramp basically just replaced the numbers with the position of the selection cursor. Faster, but way less formulaic since I first started out. If I'm unsure with a color I manually pick from the color ramp, I just take a quick look at the RGB numbers. So while the color ramp is more about eyeballing colors, I'm not even 100% sure if the RGB technique produces a more harmonious palette. I just know that based on the numbers, they technically should. It's worth noting that like every single artist out there, other colorblind artists might have a different workflow. And I'm pretty sure there are lots of amazing colorblind artists out there doing a great job. So, if you thought my process was interesting, you could give it a try. Don't pick a color using the color ramp. Don't use any pre-built palettes. Get colors exclusively by using the RGB sliders and looking at the numbers. Or, if you're hardcore, just type the numbers in yourself. No sliders needed. It could be a fun little exercise, and who knows? Experiencing the process of a colorblind person might teach you a thing or two. I hope that sharing my creative process and experiences give you some insight on how handicapped artists deal with problems with a medium that to some might seem quite trivial and straightforward, and also show how we can do a fine job adapting even to an activity that, on paper, simply shouldn't be for us. If you have any comments or questions, you can find me on Twitter at Elisha. I'd like to take this time to thank Gwendolyn Foster and the rest of the Pathfinding's team for this wonderful opportunity. What they're doing through this event is really important, and I admire them for that. And of course, thank you so much for listening. You're amazing, and please stay safe.